Alex Fitch was a 19-year-old boy. I think he'd done 1 year at Cambridge. He was the only son of this family, a lawyer and an American mother. He goes over to France in the last year of war. He's killed, I mean, it's horrible, something like September 1918. Just when you think you're wriggling out of the war and you discover your only son's been mown down in France. And his mother never gets over her grief. And this extraordinary room, the Alex Fitch room, is testament to her son. It's her way of making sure her son is never forgotten in a room without a door. And that's what I feel her grief was. And somehow that room spoke to her. In the room, there is no textile and there's no metal. It's all wood. The biblical saying is that moth nor rust doth corrupt. And then at the very end of this room, where all the wooden furnitures, floorings, paneling, wooden fixtures and fittings, the entire place sort of creaks, and it's got a very weird old smell in that, where it sort of felt like we'd entered into this baked wooden mausoleum. And then at the end of the room, eyeballing you from the end of the table, is this oil painting of Alex Fitch with the cigarette that's never going to kill him. And beaming onto him, slightly pointlessly on this bright summer's day, was an electric light that can never be turned out.
Hello. On the 8th of June 1982, the Sir Galahad troopship was about to offload the Welsh Guards at Bluff Cove in the Falkland Islands. As the guardsmen were waiting, an Argentine Skyhawk attacked and the Galahad was hit. 48 men were killed and 97 wounded, among them Simon Weston. Weston, a proud Welshman, suffered horrific burns and endured 96 operations and surgical procedures. He is one of many interviewees in a new book on monuments in Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and of course Wales, in addition to the one you heard at the top. Joining today is Tessa Dunlop, author of Lest We Forget, War and Peace in 100 Monuments, which is just out. Links are in the show notes as we chat those monuments in each country of the United Kingdom. Coming up, I have Max Hastings on D-Day and Sword Beach. Al Murray talks about the surrenders of 1945, and Phil Craig discusses the fall of empires post-war. So please do subscribe or follow, and if you can see it to giving the podcast a 5-star review, I'd be most grateful. But until then, it's me talking with Tessa Dunlop on War Monuments of the United Kingdom. Tessa, welcome back. Great pleasure to have you on Lest We Forget, your new book. Thank you for joining me.
It's always a pleasure. I'm a big fan of your podcast, Ollie, and your entrepreneurial history setup, and also for your support and encouragement writing this book.
Oh, well, that's very kind, but I don't think that's necessary because having read through it, there's so much on here that I had no idea that you were writing about. And this is war memorials throughout the country. All 4 countries, England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And
that's right. And actually, can I be a pedant? Because I do love a little bit of pedantry to kick things off. But actually, a lot of monumentalism around war is quite pedantic. You know, lists of names and people who get inscribed, people who don't, the position, the hours, wrangling with some council to get your statue away. But actually, it's British monuments, not memorials, because memorials are a big part of the book, but they don't speak to the 1900 years really up to the Boer War, maybe beginning in the Crimean War, when we're memorializing the deaths of people, because up until that point it's a lot of celebrating and not tub thumping but posturing, especially around your favorite period of history, sort of Trafalgar, Waterloo, that Great Britannia stuff.
Well, one of them. I have many favorites.
I always associate it with you. I think it's because one of the first statues marking war that I went to look at was the wonderful Achilles in Hyde Park. And we had something of a standoff. Oliver came with me in his capacity as a history editor, but it turned out actually he's a better poet than he is a general, because he got very upset about Byron being trapped on a traffic island facing down his naked nemesis, Wellington, from the other side of Park Lane. It was quite brilliant. And you're quite determined that someone is going to have the wherewithal to move Byron into a better location. And I'm absolutely certain he'll never move.
Well, Lord Roberts in the House of Lords made a speech about it, and I think plans are underway for Byron to be moved to his rightful place, hopefully somewhere like the centre of Hyde Park.
Rivaling Naked Achilles, who can only really be enjoyed by the Duke of Wellington's ghost of a widow, Kitty, who the only real sight she ever got of her husband, who spent most of his time when he wasn't on the battlefield being the sexual swordsman of Europe, was from the dining room window of number 1 Apsley House. In winter, you can look from the dining room through the trees with no leaves and you can see Naked Achilles, aka Wellington. And it's the first statue or monument erected specifically to Wellington in the wake of the Battle of Waterloo, because we had the Waterloo Bridge and stuff, but that was just a naming game. But I just rather loved that Achilles. He is ginormous. And it's really interesting. And I don't know for anybody else who's particularly into monuments or statues or has a skin in the game, you start seeing the whole world differently once you have an invested interest in statues and monuments. It's like your trig point. It's a bit like going into a room, and if I say to you, notice everything that's blue, and you come away with a very different experience of that room because all you've been doing is citing blue things. It's the exact same once you start prioritizing monuments and statues.
Yeah, and
Twice I've nearly got run over trying to reach one in the middle of a road.
well, that's what would happen if you tried to get to Byron nowadays. But there's many stories behind a lot of these monuments, which I suppose it opens up a whole new world each time. I mean, what was funny when we were at that Achilles statue is that a woman wandered by. You accosted her, as you do many members of the public who are trying to go about their business. And it turned out she had a relationship, an affair with a Wellesley, one of
It's really
Wellington's
interesting. Yeah.
descendants.
Just to paint the picture, so it's a West Morcott statue, this Naked Achilles, to Wellington. And it was hugely controversial at the time. It was commissioned by the Ladies' Committee and it got all the men very hot under the collar. And they insisted on putting a fig leaf for modesty over his genitalia. And the woman in question, who was called Megan, if I remember rightly, said, "Oh, goodness." And he's quite poorly endowed in the statue, too, like his relation, she said, with whom she had just been having an affair in Barcelona. And I actually thought this was such a wonderful anecdote. I included it in the book. And one of my professors who was reading through the book suggested I removed it in terms of vulgarity and to not offend the family. So
Well,
I did
yes, you
remove
just
it.
mentioned Megan, Barcelona, Wellesley. I mean, that's
It's
reducing the
not in the
chance.
book, Ollie. It's not in the book.
No, but it's now on the podcast.
It is, I know, and the podcast I think is probably bigger than at the moment anyway, because the book's not been launched. But can I say, Olbol, that for me, what was the fascinating journey, because originally I come from Scotland, even though I sound like this, I grew up in a very remote Highland estate where the nearest person we could speak to was the laird. His 6 children were at Eton during the term, but if we were really polite, we got to use their tennis court. Anyway, as a result, so I sound more English than I am, but I really wanted to invest a bit of time on looking not only at how we commemorate the wars we fought together in Britain, but also the wars against each other. I did find that really fascinating, actually. It really spoke to me on so many different levels about identity within Britain and which ones who we find easiest to commemorate.
Is Robert the Bruce more popular than William Wallace in Scotland? And
Good question.
because growing up until the very entertaining Mel Gibson film, Robert the Bruce was the Scottish national hero. That film goes absolutely viral, if it could go viral pre-internet. And then it becomes William Wallace is the new national hero. Or am I getting that wrong?
Well, I think they come in ebbs and flows. I realized that ideas of heroes, and that's the other interesting thing about writing this. It was you're talking at once to, for example, I kicked the book off with Boudicca. Boudicca as cast through the eyes and the pen of Tacitus, but then actually, 1900 years later, through the lens of Britain's Victorian Empire. and how we want to posit this freedom fighter actually fighting against an empire, but nonetheless held up as a sort of celebrant of our empire. So the idea of what she represented almost inverted on itself. And likewise with some of these kind of national heroes, I think William Wallace has his real denouement, his moment in the Victorian period, when there is this quest for a separate Scottish identity, but that belongs to a Britain. So a sort of acceptable Scottish identity. And you get the extraordinary Wallace Monument, which is monumental. And it's in Stirling and it's up on Abbey Craig, and you climb right up to it. And you have to pay quite a lot of money. I went in there with a fiendish Scot Nat, God bless his soul, and followed his kilt all the way up. So the view is magnificent. But what was interesting about that monument is if you look at the original plans and what was and wasn't allowed, and then this room of heroes on one of the tiers, you enter into this hall of heroes. And this really infuriated Breve, the man I went with, because he said, this is watering down Wallace's story. Why do you have other Scottish heroes? A couple of women have now been added. He said, and it was about diluting that very aggressive narrative. Even the rampant lion with this sort of paw on a person or something was removed from the original design because it was seen as too aggressive. And actually what they wanted was an establishment view of Scotland celebrating its place within Britain. So it couldn't be too vehemently brutal, which is what William Wallace was and had to be. I mean, his death was spectacularly brutal. He was dragged through London. I actually spoke to a man, a member of the Tartan Army, who wrote a song and walked through London from Westminster Abbey to Bartholomew Church, where there's a plaque to him. And they did this on the 750th anniversary of William Wallace's death. I mean, they take it really seriously, some Scots. You're laughing, Ollie. I feel that's insensitive.
Well, he's been dead for like 800 years.
What's really interesting is that kind of underdog story that really works in terms of heroes, that plays to a certain audience, not just in Scotland, but it doesn't. This guy just come back from, was it a 4-0 drubbing as the opening match, Germany versus Scotland at the beginning of the Euro Cup last year, and like talk about kind of living the reality of being the underdog. And I think that the SNP had also just been drubbed in the general election, but the kind of broader story of people we feel comfortable with celebrating, and Owain Glyndŵr in Wales, William Wallace in Scotland. These are men who fought the good fight, but they didn't quite pull it off, and that makes them eminently acceptable. Even Simon de Montfort in where's Simon de Montfort?
He died in a particularly horrible way as well, didn't he? Yes,
the Battle brutal, yeah, blood running into the crypt.
Evesham. So Evesham.
The festival in Evesham is something to behold, and this is quite recent. This Evesham festival, all about celebrating Simon de Montfort, who ends up being bested by the prince who will become Edward I, Hammer of Wales, although we call him Hammer of the Scots. And when you look at his monument or statue, I didn't even include it in the book. We don't know how to celebrate these really gruesome guys, especially if they represent Anglo dominance, because we're a little bit uncomfortable about ideas of Anglo dominance in the British narrative because England is so dominant.
Yes, and militarily then, yeah, he's always comes across as a bit of a psychopath to me, Edward I. Just loves going around slaughtering people.
But if you speak to Dan Jones, who I did for this book, because his great man is Henry V, and I hosted him actually in Kent, which was absolutely his audience, about, this warring king, Henry. And you have to be a bit of a psychopath,
yes,
to make it work for you.
Definitely.
I mean, there's no getting away from it. Either you are hung, drawn and quartered, or you hang, draw and quarter. You have to be one or the other. There's no pussyfooting around.
Yeah, you can't be a nice sort of Green Party member in the medieval period. But just going back to Scotland, because I thought we could do Scotland, then England, then Wales, and end in Northern Ireland. But you mentioned there was one monument I was very interested in, which was this Hercules plane that went down.
Yeah.
Which is very sad.
Right up to date. I'm glad you singled that one out. I remember saying, because I wanted to take it right up from Boudica up to the Afghanistan, most recent conflict in Afghanistan, and even actually touched on Ukraine, because I met a sister of a man who was working for Fox News who died in Ukraine as a journalist, and they're pushing for some form of memorial to commemorate journalists who have died covering wars. But the Hercules that went down in North Perthshire at Loch Loch particularly resonated with me because I grew up in Perthshire. And as a child, one of the most exciting things that happened in the Glen, this is pre-Wi-Fi, and the beam didn't bounce around the mountain, so we didn't even have telly. One of the most exciting things was when they flew really low on training missions, the RAF, going on up to Lossiemouth. You could literally see the colour of the pilot's hair, and the whole Glen would reverberate. For people who know North Perthshire, I lived opposite Schiehallion by Loch Rannoch, and we'd run out the house because all the window panes would rattle, and you'd wave and wave as a child, and it was so exciting. And when I really kind of a bit of a childhood dream coming true, really, I get to speak to a squadron leader who's always doing those training exercises, because that's where they learn to fly really low, to drop loads, do all their dangerous maneuvers. He said I could tell the color of the polka dot on someone's bikini. Only someone in the RAF would give that example, by the way. I was like, as a child, I wasn't wearing a bikini. It was the Highlands of Scotland. You never wore a bikini in the Highlands. But anyway, and rather wonderfully, when you send, it's a lot of oral history in the book, and you send your extracts, including the one I sent to you, which we might touch on, I hope, where you're featured. I send it, and then I always expect or dread the amendments that people are going to make, because often they sort of gut the best bits. And I thought he's bound mistakes. To take out. Yeah, all the flag mistakes, indeed, Ollie. But he didn't ask me to get rid of the bikini line, which I thought was brilliant. But anyway, this is apropos really a tragic story, and I remember it literally and personally scarred Perthshire for a long time when a Hercules crashed into the side of the mountain just by Loch Loch, and I walked out to it on the 31st anniversary. It was sort of 8 miles off the beaten track. You have to get permission from another laird. And
so what, this was 91, 92?
93. And you could see the scarring still on the hill. And all 9 men were killed. And by sheer chance, Gary had been walking up the steps of that Hercules. And his leader said, now get on the other plane. You can fly back on this one. Literally, that pivot saved his life. And he's made the pilgrimage out there almost every year to remember those 9 men. And my professor who was helping me with the book said, oh, but Tessa, these men didn't die in war. And I'm like, but are you crazy? Because they're training for war. This is the huge part of war, is the training. You've got to be match fit. Gary was also really interesting on what he considers to be this exclusive and extraordinary privilege that is going to war. And I asked him to unpick that, and we were together at Bomber Command, and by this time I also asked him some questions in relation to that monument. And he said, you're so singularly focused when you're fighting in a war, like everything else is blocked out. Any existential worry, any anxiety, any other thoughts, totally silenced. You are focused on one thing, and that is defeating the enemy.
We'll move, I think, from Scotland to, unless you want to cover the Duke of Kent. I think you mentioned the Duke of Kent's plane crash during the war.
That was in the same chapter, which is Accidental War, where his father, the late Duke of Kent, was the last royal to die in active service in 1942. His Sunderland flying boat crashes just off the lip of the coast onto the North Sea from Caithness. That was a monumental marathon to get there. But I was really glad I walked out to the monument. And then I was lucky enough to get in and interview the Duke in Wren House in Kensington Palace. So that was a bit of a coup, actually. I mean, the Duke isn't a man of many words, if one can be bold. But it made me understand one of the kind of key roles of the royal family a bit better, Ollie. That he's this sort of human stitch in the nation's tapestry of remembering. And actually, when I went then around the National Memorial Arboretum, and everywhere I went, unveiled by the Countess of Wessex, unveiled by HRH, the Duke of Kent, and I kind of felt this weird kind of bond with them. And I realized, talking to people who have been at the receiving end of his commemorative appearances, it really matters. It really matters to people.
These plane crashes then that you've been talking about, the last two, this will make a nice end to the podcast because I shall mention another crash that actually occurred in Scotland, but it was from a flight that took off in Northern Ireland, and there'll be a historical precedent to it. That thought just occurred that you might be interested in.
Listen out for that, Ollie.
Okay, all right, so let's head south to England, the old enemy. And
Can I just flag up that today, it's a little bit earlier than the pod will be released, Alfred, the founder of England, is featured in the Telegraph today because of
yes,
my
I will
little search for
provide a
Alfred.
link. I will provide a link in the show notes for people to read that. And Alfred is this. Well, you've got two entries for Alfred. I mean, this monument in Winchester might be
Yeah.
more familiar. Well, certainly more familiar to me, having grown up in that part of the world. But the other one is in Oxfordshire. Is that right?
Yes, and Wantage, isn't it weird? I'm going to be honest, when you're writing a book, you also are aware at the back of your mind you're going to need to promote and sell the book. And so I was very cognizant that I needed to include and it's easy to do in a way because World War II is so live in our minds, hearts and minds, and with the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, I was cognizant that I needed to include some of the last remaining veterans and stories attached to that war. And I got some really great voices to somebody who'd flown for Bomber Command and etc. But in my head, I was like, so they'll really play well to say a Telegraph audience. And then the Telegraph get the book, and the one thing they pull out is this Alfred bloke, right? And I come from Scotland, bearing in mind, okay. And I'm like, really, what? And then of course they want photographs because newspapers always want photographs. And I very nearly didn't go to Wantage. I thought, well, I'll just do Winchester. And then when I did decide, because there's no train station in Wantage, right? So it's quite difficult to get to. And when I did, I bundled my old mum into the car because she was down staying. And of course, she took a picture and she cut my head off. No, she cut Alfred's head off. So there's no picture of me to go with this wonderful spread on Alfred. It was the one. Normally, I was really careful. Each one I made sure was a good photo, etc. But not that one because I thought, well, nobody's going to care about Alfred in Wanted. He's got a chipped axe. Like, who gives a damn? And then that seemingly really spoke to the literary editor because he felt this was absolutely the kind of heart of Tory graph land, and also this unlikely hero who had a second coming again under the Victorians. The Victorians absolutely went mad for statues. It was a bit like our social media. You know, if in doubt, just bang up another statue. Why not? And so you get several iterations of Alfred. You've also got one in Southwark, near where I live, and you've got one in Pewsey. So there's four in total. But the two most majestic or surprising are Wantage in both in Wessex. But actually, the story for me didn't really work or make sense until I went to Lindisfarne and saw the Stone of Destiny and the pickaxe wielding Vikings who arrived and coshed everyone over the head in Northumbria. And then you realize, oh, so that's what Alfred arrested. That's what made Alfred great, was this external enemy. Because if Churchill didn't have the Nazis, he ain't got a massive statue in Parliament Square. And if Alfred didn't have the Vikings, wait, Alfred who? England what? You know?
Yes, definitely. I mean, Alfred is a huge. I'm completely contradicting myself, laughing at the William Wallace taking that seriously, but Alfred the Great. I mean, you've got to take him seriously.
Yeah, but that's because that speaks to your soft English heart,
I
Ollie,
know.
doesn't it? And what's interesting, talking of why we need underdogs, you know, and why that makes Edward the First really hard to love as a warrior. Maybe we can love Henry V because he clobbered the French, but you can't love someone who clobbered other Brits. That's really complicated. But Alfred was clobbering the Vikings, and also he had a lot of personal agony. He was not a well man. They think it now retrospectively might have been Crohn's disease. On top of which, he was the youngest of five brothers. He struggled through much of his life. There was sort of, you know, it wasn't just burning cakes. There was much more to Alfred than that. But it wasn't an easy ride. All of his family had been wiped out by the age of 23. So he kind of accidentally inherits the kingship of Wessex. And also this emphasis on learning. People love that. And the English language. Forget Latin. That's the language for the frogs. What a no. And this focus, like when I was, that was the other thing, is each of my statues needed to be to war or to a warrior or to the remembering of war. And the Alfred in Southwark looks like he's in peasant robes. That's no good. I needed someone with some kind of spear or sword. But actually, what's interesting about the Wantage one is he's carried on this challenging fight in his afterlife because he had his arm and axe lobbed off by hooligans in 2008, which is a bit sad. Anyway, they
And
stuck it back on, Ollie. They stuck it
good,
back on.
good, and British heart, I would like to say, not purely English, and
No, English.
that's why we're going to get
Your
to.
heart.
No,
Your heart or
but
Alfred's.
that's why I like this book because it covers all the nations. You see. Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories, and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts, and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99. That's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show. So remaining in England. I mean, the cover is, they've done a great job of Harper.
Yes. So can we talk about that? Because
But in particular, I like the inlay, all black for memorializing and funerals, and I think that's a really nice touch.
it's not too Victoriana, is it? But
I don't think
I've
so.
got to
No, and
say,
there's lots of gold on the front as well. I mean, must have cost a pretty penny to produce.
we need someone to buy it, so that'd be really kind of just like one person could. But what's interesting about the cover, and I don't know if there's aspiring writers or indeed other writers listening, but it is these things. There's always a tension between writer and editor, and I think over the cover, my editor, that was almost a breaking point for him. He would send an email going, right, this is it now, Tessa, like almost anticipating that it was not going to be it, that I was going to push back inevitably. And you have to go on a bit of a journey, but it's always worth the pushback. I think that cover, people have said, oh, we love this cover. This is the book to hold on to and remember. And so we got there, even if it did. Well, I sacrificed my relationship with my editor on the altar of the cover, if I'm honest with you.
Nicely put. But it's of the cenotaph. So, I mean, that's probably the most famous monument.
Yeah, and I find that one quite hard to write about because often the ones that are the best known are a bit more challenging. The cenotaph, it's interesting. Those better known memorials, I found some of them harder to get an original angle on. And it wasn't until I spoke to the wife of a man, another Gary, who was killed in Afghanistan, Gary Thompson. And his wife, Jackie, was so brilliant at articulating, again, the importance of the royal family. She said, you know, it's something important if the royal family's there. And I then looked into that relationship between the cenotaph and royalty, because I think we associate the cenotaph with an old monarch, George V, or the late Queen, or even old Charles today. And actually why that matters and how that spoke beyond, you know, the kind of individual idea of death, but spoke to a nation. And because the cenotaph itself, there's so many iterations. There's literally you could apply for a catalogue of different cenotaphs and choose one for your town. And in some ways, the one in Belfast and the one in Bristol, which are 2 other cenotaphs I featured, were architecturally more interesting because that particular cenotaph, Lutyens cenotaph in London, has been so plundered in terms of working out why it works in the way it does, because there is an extraordinary dignity to it. It sort of tapers up to the sky in an almost ethereal fashion, given that it's made of stone.
We may as well discuss this because you mentioned a catalogue of cenotaphs. There's one memorial or monument in a certain school.
Harrow on the Hill. This is going to seem very in this book, but Ollie, I can't tell people enough how you helped me. I couldn't have got through this book. I had quite a tight timeline, and I was determined to travel to all 100 monuments. And after 6 speeding points, Ollie discovered that you were also a counsellor, I think, weren't you? Do you remember?
Well,
I
have to
drove
admit
up to
that
Culloden.
when you were talking about the First World War, and I think we were talking about that, I think at least acknowledge a generation of young men who went through all these public schools, which does sound like I'm slightly obsessed here, but it remains a fact that if you were in the officer corps of during the Great War, I think there's some crazy statistic that you can pick me up on, but it's it's at least twice as likely to die as a private soldier. And I think the death rate was, if not that, it's more. And so I just thought the crypt at Harrow School had a big impact on me, so I thought it might with you.
Yeah, I was delighted you took me to Harrow. So that was a special day. Father James, the chaplain who was there in your day, was in his last year at the school. And actually I gave it unusually two monuments because the crypt spoke to you and is very moving, isn't it? Underneath this extraordinary Gothic piece of religious architect, you go into these whitewashed walls that are lined with what feels like an eternity of, dare I say it, in true Harrow style, quintessentially English names like Wilfred and James and William and Edwin and Edward, and they're all goddamn well dead. Every single bloody one of them by 1919. Over 600 Harrovians have died. And you're right, there was a disproportionate number. And again, you pushed me in that direction. You encouraged me to go and speak to Anthony Selden, which I did. And I'm grateful for your help there. But I thought most moving of all was that Alex Fitch room. Maybe you could tell us what that was as you grew up at the school, what you knew, or were you even
Well,
aware of that room?
this is the strange thing. The first time I'd been in that room was with you on our visit because I had not even been aware of its existence, and it was certainly never a place for us to go to. So I think it was just left, and you can tell the story about the light, but I think it was just left locked and maybe maintained, but beyond that, not really used.
Which I felt was weirdly tragic actually in itself. So Alex Fitch was a 19-year-old boy. I think he'd done 1 year at Cambridge. He was the only son, two children, one sister, but he of this family, a lawyer and an American mother, clearly plenty money. He goes over to France in the last year of war. He's killed. I mean, it's horrible. Something like September 1918. Just when you think you're wriggling out of the war and you discover your only son's been mown down in France. And his mother never gets over her grief. And this extraordinary room, the Alex Fitch room, is testament to her son. It's her way of making sure her son is never forgotten, and in a way that you only can do if you're a woman of means with time who's basically trapped in a room without a door. And that's what I feel her grief was. And somehow that room spoke to her. In the room, there is no textile and there's no metal, it's all wood. So because of the biblical idea that, moth shan't destroy it nor rust. I think there's actually here we are. The biblical saying is that moth nor rust doth corrupt. It's a biblical line. And then at the very end of this room, where all the wooden furnitures, floorings, paneling, they're Cromwellian, they're Elizabethan, like it's not any old wooden fixtures and fittings. The entire place sort of creaks and it's got a very weird old smell in that. Do you remember that hot summer's day where it sort of felt like we'd entered into this baked wooden mausoleum? And then at the end of the room, eyeballing you from the end of the table, is this oil painting of Alex Fitch with the cigarette that's never going to kill him. And beaming onto him, slightly pointlessly on this bright summer's day, was an electric light that can never be turned out because it's the eternal light, except, of course, during the blackout in World War II. But there was something deeply moving in the sort of futility almost of that room, which has no utility, as you've alluded to. And I was lucky enough through Father James to talk to Alex Fitch's what would have been great nephew, who again spoke to his late great aunt's pain and the fact that Alex Fitch's room was left untouched, his hairbrushes, his duvet cover, it was cleaned regularly. She never recovered. And I felt that so profoundly, that idea of a mother's grief. And the only way that I made sense of it or I can't begin to fully understand it, but got some way to it was by talking to Helen Lewis, who's statue number 99 in the book. Her son dies in Afghanistan. And I told her the story and I showed her the photo of Alex in the room. And she said, but that's it. She said, that's it. And actually I'm gonna read what she wrote. What a terribly sad but lovely story. I can fully understand how his mother channeled all her energy into making that room happen. It is very hard to get your head around the fact your son is not here anymore. In the early days, it is like you are going mad. You are searching for them because you cannot comprehend they are not here. I found it very scary. I just love Helen. She's such a wonderful room. But that to me was the constant undimmed light, was the mother's love. And whenever I hear now any death in Ukraine, and there's several every day, as we know, that awful Sumi attack, and it's just that. And the funny thing is about war commemoration is the neat militaristic way we try and package it so that we make heroes in the story and we bake them into our eternal memory. But what it can't capture is this emotional messiness that's unspoken and really uncomfortable, and actually no good for countries who need to recruit into their war machine. It needs to stay hidden.
Well, what I'll say is that you wrote about it beautifully, which, knowing that area intimately, it's very nice to read that particular section, the Fitch Room.
Well, I was grateful to go
Not
down.
my
And the other thing
involvement.
is,
I'd like to add, but
no, I was, but also that idea of, white privilege. Well, it didn't get them very far back in the First World War, did it? White privilege. You're more likely to get mown down if you're a posh public school boy, proportionally, because partly
absolutely,
because you wore your cloth cap, your officer cap. You didn't have a, not that a metal tin helmet did
indeed, and
much
you had
good,
to
but
lead the charge. You couldn't hang
no,
back.
no.
Right. So we've done. I think that covers England. I'm very keen to cover Wales. We must do Wales. Now, my
Well,
immediate
I met your hero, didn't I? I met your hero. It was Simon Weston.
yes,
Yeah,
Simon Weston, of
yeah,
course. Love Simon Weston. I mean,
yeah.
he,
I got to interview him.
I think for anyone, I'm 49. Anyone around my age would have grown up in the 80s with his
Yeah,
ever presence in being interviewed. He always speaks beautifully.
his struggle, his very real struggle with he's. I wanted to make him a monument, literally, because he's had, I think, 92 reconstructive operations. He's a Welsh Guard. I'm sure you know his story, but just in case you have a young listener, Ollie, he is a Falklands War veteran in the Welsh Guards. Got his carrier. I think it was I should
It was
remember this.
The
HMI.
Sir Galahad, which was a troop carrier.
It was a troop carrier, and he was the most severely injured to survive. And his story is remarkable. He is remarkable, and funnily enough, his humor was brilliant. I mean, you can tell he's told the same jokes. I was in Orpington. I was actually in Kent. He'd come to Kent, but the queue snaked out the door. And the gear changes he can make from, melting to death on a troop carrier full of men who've just been sort of detonated, to then telling people, oh, if you kiss me, you've kissed my ass, because there's a skin graft from my ass to my face. He just did these brilliant gear changes that had the floor, the room with him, high, low, high, low. But he directed me to the Falklands War Rock and Alexandra Gardens in Cardiff. And there was something kind of wonderful about the effort that was taken to bring this over from the Falkland Islands. And one of the Welsh Guards was, in his later job in life, was as a heavy load floor specialist. So he was able to help them with the erection of this rock and how to get it off the naval ship that brought it over. So I don't know, I love those kind of, almost pilgrimage style journeys. But also in Wales, there was Owen Glendower and his many faces, his, again, acceptable Edwardian face, speaking to pan-British idea of Owen, and then a more recent Owen who looks like he wants to kill every English tourist that ever enters Corwin.
You talk about that journey. I hadn't realised that they'd carried from the Falklands this
Yeah,
stone.
they brought it from the Falklands.
That's an insane. I mean, the journey itself. What is it? 8,000 miles, I think.
Yeah, actually, that's the other thing that I was very impressed by. And I think it's one of the, because I'm so unmilitary and couldn't even wear my uniform right at school, I'm endlessly fascinated by the belonging of serving in one of the armed forces and what it delivers for you. And I know that some of our armed forces, find the transition very hard into, civilian life. But actually, they also, a lot of them find this great sort of support network. And I was endlessly impressed by the importance of commemoration and the importance of remembering their fallen, whether they served in Iraq, Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, the way in which they wear their fellow comrades' lives and memories and keep them alive. And the commando statue up sits opposite Ben Nevis, one of the most visited monuments, actually, one of the few to be unveiled in the wake of the Second World War. Because now we get really excited about the Second World War, but actually straight after the Second World War, we didn't build any monuments because monuments hadn't worked. We'd built loads after the First World War, and it didn't do anything for maintaining peace. And also because we'd been bombed and we needed to build houses. So there was very few kind of conventional war statues. Most of the World War I statues had to sort of bunk up and make space to remember the Second War. But that commando monument was an exception, opened, of course, unveiled by the Queen Mother. Who else? But again, that I found that deeply moving, that behind it there's this memorial garden. And I spoke to the commando, retired now, who oversees looking after the garden. And he choked up remembering the men who served with him in Ireland and in Iraq.
Well, you've mentioned Northern Ireland, and again, you've written about it very sensitively. But I was very pleased that you've covered the experience of the Unionist side, the Nationalist side, and the British Army, who all suffered during the Troubles. So what I mean by that is Enniskillen, Bloody Sunday in Londonderry.
I've got to, if I may,
Please.
big hand behind me going to Northern Ireland. I felt rather overwhelmed by Northern Ireland because I almost my own ignorance. And I realised it's what holds back a lot of British people from talking more inclusively about Northern Ireland, is this idea that we've got imposter syndrome a little bit. But I'm glad you sent me there, and you were obsessed with me, including Enniskillen for obvious reasons, because this was 1987 when an IRA bomb was detonated and those commemorating by the memorial were killed. And when I get there, and sure enough, there's this sentinel soldier, head bowed. It's a war memorial from World War One. I'm actually commemorating Irish regiments, pan-Irish regiments who served in World War One. But what I discovered was it's actually hugely controversial, that monument, because on it they added these doves to the individuals. I think it was 11 and then later 12 who died in this bombing in 1987. And I spoke to a lovely woman, Stella. She opens my book, actually, because I didn't make Enniskillen because of this reason, one of the monuments, but I wanted to open with her story where she never saw her mum again because she's waiting to eat the tray bake on a Sunday, and she heard what sounded like a garage door slam, and it was actually a bomb going off in the centre of town where her parents were commemorating, and they were both killed. And she was so angry that this war memorial was then used as the repository for these peace doves, each one commemorating a life lost, including her parents. And she felt, but hang on, you can't equate the murder of my parents with a war. And they weren't even referred to as murdered. They used the word killed. And then her and the other bereaved families have spent years campaigning, and finally they've got their plaque on the wall where her parents were standing, next to the wall of this dilapidated Catholic church, where her parents were standing when the bomb went off. And that's been a massive wrangle because, of course, now post-peace process, we want to forget, or there's a huge movement to forget what happened. And the local council is run by Sinn Féin. But eventually, recently, they've had this plaque erected, and at the bottom of it said, "Lest we forget." So I thought that's going to be what my book's called.
Yeah, that's a lovely start to the book, I think. And then, yes, I mentioned the Bloody Sunday, but also there's Warren Point as well. And I mean, I've just been reading that before we started recording. We are coming to the end, so we shouldn't linger too long. But it's it's just crushing to read about. I mean, everyone who's killed during this conflict, but in particular, people whose bodies just no longer exist due to the power of a bomb.
Yeah, melted. I spoke to this lovely man, Terry, whose brother was killed. He was driving, because the Warren Point, there was 2 bombs were detonated. The IRA had absolutely tracked, shows we're creatures of habit, especially the army, what they anticipated would happen, and they were correct in both cases. But I spoke to 2 individuals who lost family members in that attack, and all that was left of Terry's brother was a hip bone, his pelvis bone. He'd just been melted by this bomb that was detonated. And I think sometimes the way in which we report on the casualties of war, women and children, the focus, and resonates particularly at the moment with Gaza. So this idea somehow that a soldier is the death of a soldier is acceptable because in the rules of war they are part of the weaponry of a state, but the devastation they leave in their wake when these always invariably young and mainly men die is unfathomable, really.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. Now, if there is a paperback version that maybe is in 101 monuments, this is the segue that I was talking about earlier. We now meet, the circle joins, And Northern Ireland meets Scotland with another very tragic crash, also during the Troubles, actually. I'm pushing the Troubles to everyone right now because I don't think, we talk about it enough. But
People aware about your new book?
not yet. No, maybe not. I don't know. But the Chinook helicopter crash, which was carrying 29, so I think 4 RAF personnel, and the remainder were the cream of the anti-terrorist at that time in 1994, took off from RAF Aldergrave, I think, in Northern Ireland, and was flying to Inverness and crashed at the Mull of Kintyre due to technical failure. There was a long wrangle over blaming the pilots, and there's some really dodgy stuff carried out by the RAF at the time, and the government eventually conducted an inquiry to discover that it was all technical failure. But yes, 29 people killed. And again, I think the field or the part of the Mull of Kintyre that got hit by the helicopter still bears the scars today, and there is a monument there for all 29. And it links Northern Ireland to Scotland, just like the giants of old who walked from the Giants' Causeway to the Mull of Kintyre. So,
and I should say that all those men, were they all men?
Actually, no, I think there were 2 women. There were 2 women.
2 women. They will be named on the Armed Forces Memorial, where every year casualties of war and training for war and military personnel who were killed in terror attacks are remembered in the National Memorial Arboretum, and the Armed Forces Memorial is my postscript. So I do actually have 101 monuments in the book. I know it's a cheat, but I couldn't help it. And ex-Colonel Ali Brown, who's a delightful woman, she spoke to that monument and why it mattered to her. One of her friends is named, she died in a helicopter training accident in Sierra Leone. But she wrote, I'm just going to end with this final paragraph. And beyond the names, this is the names on these white walls, yet more white wall space, smooth and nameless. For Ali, quote, this is poignant as well, those blank bits, because in our minds, we know there will be a next time. We know there will be more deaths and more names.
That's a lovely way to end it. Tessa, thank you very much and best of luck with the book. Listeners, links are in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Plenty more great history on the way, so please do subscribe or follow. And if you want to get in touch, links are in the show notes. But until then, thank you and good night.